All right, Mike, welcome back. How was your conference?
It was great. I was at the Newsletter Marketing Summit in Austin. Pro show listeners just heard me talk about my trip to the Painted Porch bookstore, which is Ryan Holiday's bookstore in Bastrop, Texas. I think that's the name of the town. It's not actually in Austin proper. It's a bit of a drive to get there, but very cool bookstore. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a kind of a whirlwind 48 hours, but I learned lots more than I ever could have imagined about newsletters.
Yeah, yeah.
And changes coming to mind shortly. I'll mention that my newsletter, I sent it today as we record this, and I shared a couple of the lessons that I learned from that conference, and that I think are generally applicable to anybody who's interested in PKM and wants to use it to be more productive or creative. There were some really cool people, really cool sessions. And in that newsletter, I also included my sketch notes from the conference. So
Nice.
I published those. I mean, I send out the newsletter, obviously, but I also publish them publicly. So I'll include the link to the newsletter if people are interested in taking a look at that.
Yeah, Mike, as you're thinking about which of these conferences you go to and what you engage in, how do you make your decisions? Like what makes a conference rise to the level of like committing your time to it? The travel, the cost, all of that stuff.
Good question. I do not know, other than like I see something and I'm like, that looks interesting. The Newsletter Marketing Summit, I didn't actually go there because, I want to learn a bunch about newsletters. It was more so I saw some of the people that were going to be there and they were my people. So,
I got it.
I don't know how to say this without sounding a little bit precious, but it's a little bit lonely being an internet creator in
Oh yeah.
Wisconsin.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't sound precious at all. That seems very, very understandable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, every once in a while, I just got to get out of here and get around some people who are doing the same sort of thing that I do. And
Yeah.
yeah, saw Jay Klaus, saw Nathan Barry, saw Chanel Basilio, who are all some of my favorite creator people on the internet. I'm in all of their communities and courses. So yeah, it was really cool. Actually got to get coffee with Jay Klaus one morning, picked his brain about community platforms. So yeah, I met Stacy Harmon for the first time. She's kind of the Evernote expert. And
Okay.
Evernote, by the way, she was kind of filling me in because I was familiar with the path and being acquired by Bending Spoons, and didn't sound like it was going real great. But kind of, I've been noticing from the outside lately, it seems like they're doing the right things and they're making a lot of improvements. And she's like, "Oh yeah,
Okay.
I'm part of the partner program, and they've been including me on all of their roadmaps and stuff." And she's like, "They're really listening. They're implementing a lot of this stuff." She's like, "Evernote's got a bright future." I'm like, "Cool."
Yeah.
Never would have
I
guessed
didn't
it would
even
have
know
turned
it.
out that way, but
I
yeah.
had no idea it even existed anymore. Like I did not know that it was even a thing anymore. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I got to meet Stacy and a bunch of other people. I actually met Stacy at like impromptu dinner thing after the conference at Terry Black's, which is like one of the famous barbecue places in Texas, where you have to
Nice.
like get there, stand in line, and the line wraps, all the way outside the restaurant, around the parking lot, just to get
And you
some
just
meat.
hope and you just hope they still have what you want when you walk up to the door, because they're probably one of those places where it's like, oh, we sold out of that 15 minutes ago and
Yeah.
we only make as much as we need.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I was there at 7 o'clock. They just keep making it. I mean, they've got, a whole bunch of these smokers that are running all the time. So
Yeah.
it was delicious.
Yeah. Awesome. Alrighty. Before we get into our book, let's do some follow up. I will start. I was supposed to think about the things I want to learn and how do I apply the concepts from the last book into that. So that would be spaced repetition, interleaving, varying what's in there. I focused in on this one for this week in terms of it actually ties into some things I'm doing in class and with my students. But I think I'm going to think about scripture and how do I develop my own app to do spaced repetition, to interleave different types of scripture, and then to vary the scripture that I'm trying to memorize. So I'm going to hold it off for there because I don't want to it's still in the development, but like I'm thinking about how do I develop an app that allows me to do that stuff. So I'm gonna say green check mark on this one. Like I think I've achieved a green check mark because while I didn't think about all the things I want to learn, I did think about one, and I thought pretty hard about it. So I'm pretty pumped
Nice.
about that. Yeah. How about you?
Kudos to you. So mine, I guess technically it's done because I did explore it. That's actually in the thing. Exploration is the goal. And that's the space repetition via Readwise. So I think I've come to the conclusion that I'm going to use Readwise, but I am not going to use it for book notes at all. I'm going to use it as a place where I collect different feeds and things, and as a like research type of thing. That was one of the things that stood out to me from the Newsletter Marketing Summit was like people are doing all this research and they're kind of aggregating the things that are important and into a single place. And it just makes sense that RSS would be a part of that for me. And then from there, using the highlights, piping those over to Obsidian, using something like the Obsidian Web Clipper, I think is going to be the workflow there. I don't want everything, in Obsidian. I just want like the bits and pieces that are really important from the stuff that I'm reading that I want to like take action on. And this is the type of stuff where it's like, for example, every time I send a newsletter, I've got a something cool section. And one of the things, in addition to the sketch notes this time, was the announcement about Obsidian being free for commercial use. That's cool. Yep. So like I might highlight a section out of that, clip it to Obsidian, or clip so that when I sit down to write my newsletter, I've got that, that piece of text that's available. None of that is implemented yet. So there's still some work to be done there, but I do think that Readwise is going to stick. We'll see though.
Nice. Awesome. Are you ready to bounce into today's book?
I am. Let's do it.
All right. So today's book is called The Catalyst, How to Change Anyone's Mind. It's by Jonah Berger. Jonah is a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's written multiple different books. So one's called Contagious, one's called An Invisible Influence, and then there's The Catalyst. He does like research and work on word of mouth, social influence, customer behavior, consumer behavior. The Catalyst is all about, changing people's minds and thinking about changing people's minds. We thought this one would be a good one. This was actually a recommendation from one of the Bookworm listeners. So we took this as a recommendation. And just to kind of throw a plug out here, we actually have a link in the show notes that if you'd like to recommend a book for us to read on Bookworm, you can feel free to go hit that link, fill out the little form. It'll recommend the book for us. Throw an Amazon link in there. That way we know what version of the book that you're wanting us to read. And then we'll take a look at it. We can't promise that we're going to read them all, but we'll take a look at it and we'll evaluate whether or not we think it makes sense for the Bookworm audience.
We did get a couple of those, and I think your next book actually is going to be a listener recommendation. So
it is both a listener and a Mike recommendation. So and my favorite books are the ones I don't pick, if I'm being very, very honest with you. I don't know why. I just like reading books that other people suggest. It makes it fun for me. All right, so back to the Catalyst. So we're going to think about basically changing people's minds. So if we roll into, well, first off, Mike, do you have any thoughts on the Catalyst going into it? Were you interested? Was it like, this is going to be okay? Like, what was your thought going into it?
I was a little bit apprehensive, to tell you the truth, because the subtitle, How to Change Anyone's Mind, this has shades of Robert Greene to me.
Okay.
The image is like a butterfly, but the wings are like a brain. So it's kind of cool artistic style, but just the whole communicated message there is sort of free your mind. I don't know. It just kind of rubbed me the wrong way going into it. Okay. I will say though that that's not accurate for the rest of the book. So I don't want to, set a picture here which is going to paint a negative impression of for me of the rest of the book, because I think there's a lot of really great stuff in here. So maybe, if it was up to me, I would redo the title, subtitle, and the cover, but
Yeah. So I went into it going, oh, this book sounds great, right? Like this sounds really interesting because I like the idea of how to interact with people, how to change their mind, not in a manipulative way, but in like a convince them, arguments, sell them type of a thing. The thing that made me a little bit nervous about it is the reviews. I always like to look at the reviews, and the reviews are really mixed on this book. So the Amazon reviews got it at a 4.6, with a fairly high number of ratings, but the Goodreads review drops it below a 4. And anytime a book drops below a 4, if it's not like really niche, I start to get worried because I'm like, well, hold on, right? Like below a 4, you've got as many 3s as you have 5s, and then you've got your other situations, or you have more 3s, if you think on average, right? So so I'm like, I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about this one. And overall, I have a similar sentiment to you. I got a good bit of good stuff out of this one, so I'm excited to talk to you about it and see what else we can dig out of it.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so the introduction. So he starts off pretty dramatic, and what I'll say is I think the examples he uses throughout the book are dramatic, but not in a bad way. Like they're meant to be, they're meant to have a purpose. They're meant to like have an impact in terms of, he doesn't pick, just like these real fluffy examples of how we're trying to change somebody's mind. He goes into this first example when he's talking about like a criminal negotiator. And how that negotiator, kind of approaches the situation. Well, there's a bunch of these different examples that he's going to work through when he's working through his different points. So that was an interesting idea from number one that started off right from the beginning of the book. But the important thing that we need to get out of the introduction is his framework. So this book, for those of you who are thinking about picking it up, this book is 100% driven by a framework. And the framework is reduce. So he's saying, okay, well, we need to reduce essentially like the negative aversion, whatever it might be, to people actually changing their mind, to people doing what we want them to do or thinking the way we want them to think. So reduce the what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters. Right, the 6 letters of reduce are reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, and then corroborating evidence, and that's how he spells the word reduce. So the reason I got mixed up between 5 and 6 there is because it's only 5 ideas, but the last idea has two words in it, so it's corroborating evidence. So I'm going to stop here, Mike. What was your thought on the introduction?
The introduction's fine, but that whole model / framework is ridiculous.
Okay.
Can we just agree? A 6-letter acronym for 5 points is just confusing.
It is. And I got to the end of the book and I was like, there's one more. Like, there's one more point that he needs to make. And I was like,
Me too.
No, there's not, because the last point has two letters. So
yeah, and some of these are forced. So I actually don't like the framework. Like, I get why people do this sort of thing, but I wish we would just discuss the ideas for what they are, as opposed to trying to crowbar them into an acrostic, which I don't think is actually going to help me remember this any better, because it doesn't fit. My initial thought, if I were to recall that reduce acronym, is no, that can't be right because there were only 5 points.
Yeah. So the point of the reduce, right? So you might be wondering, like, well, how does reduce get into here? So he starts it off and says, okay, inertia drives everything. So people want to keep doing what they're doing. You're trying to change their mind. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to reduce their inertia. You're trying to reduce their resistance to change. So how do we approach this entire problem, this universal problem of people having this resistance to change? Oh, well, let's go through the acronym reduce. So that's essentially what he's trying to do. I agree with Mike here. I don't think that my takeaway from this book is going to be reduce. I don't really think that, like, I'm going to, in 6 months from now, if you're going to ask me, hey, you read The Catalyst, like, what's your main takeaway from The Catalyst? It's not going to be like, oh, he had this, across like this reduce thing. And nope, that's not going to be it. It's going to be some other points of it. So if you're good with it, we can move on to chapter 1.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so chapter 1 is reactance. So in reactance, he defines it as the unpleasant state that occurs when people feel their freedom is lost or threatened. So you're coming in, you're telling people to do or to not do something, to change or to not change, right? Like you're giving them this idea, you're trying to be a catalyst. and they feel as though they've lost their freedom, they've lost their agency in order to, be part of this process. So he's going to say a catalyst in this situation, a catalyst essentially incorporates agency into this process. He gives 4 different ways to do that. So provide a menu, ask, don't tell, highlight a gap, and then start with understanding. And then he's got this other stair-step thing, which I'm sure we're probably going to talk about before we leave the reactants chapter. So he's basically saying, okay, the first thing we need to do is we need to think about the fact that people are going to have some essentially negative reaction to what you want them to do, and then you have to figure out a way around that.
Yeah, essentially, if you tell somebody to do something, they're more likely not to do it, and they use the story of the Tide Pods at the beginning here, which is just ridiculous, but illustrates the point clearly, I guess. Where basically Tide Pods are these laundry detergent pods. You throw them in the washing machine, and you don't have to measure things out. Well, apparently there was like a thing where people were eating these, and obviously they don't want to get in trouble, so they're telling people, don't eat these. You will get sick. You could die, whatever. It's kind of like whenever you see something like on the McDonald's coffee cups, it's like caution, hot. That's there for a reason.
Yeah.
Because they got sued because someone spilled coffee all over themselves or something.
The chainsaw blade is sharp. Don't touch. Okay, great. Like, yes, that would make sense.
Yeah. So you get Tide's response where it's like, we need to formally say, don't eat these. So that if anybody does and they sue us, we've got it covered. But what happened after they told people not to eat them is that people kept eating them, and actually they ate them a lot more, and they paid a whole bunch of money. They had Rob Gronkowski, the tight end from the Patriots, do this advertising campaign. He's like, do not eat these. And people just kept eating them, which is ridiculous. But also the point that they're hitting on here is that people have a need for freedom and autonomy. And essentially, if you tell someone, hey, don't do this, or you can't do this, then they're kind of like, oh yeah, well, watch me.
Yeah.
And it seems weird to think that people would do that when they could have such negative health consequences from that.
Yeah.
That's the part that's a little hard to grok, I guess. But yeah, the point is that people have this built-in anti-persuasion radar, which I think is a really effective visual.
Yep. I think the principle here is spot on, right? Like if you're going to come at me and you're going to tell me don't push the red button, the first thing I'm going to think is, well, why? Like, what happens when I push the red button? Like, I want to push the red button. Don't tell me not to push the red button, right? Like, it's very natural to have this reaction. I'm going to move us to these 4 key ways to kind of overcome this. And what he would say is like reduce reactants, right? It's like, so what are the 4 ways to reduce reactants? Provide menus, ask, don't tell, highlight the gap, and then start with understanding. The one that I think resonates the most with me is the ask, don't tell. That like, if you get in there and you start talking to people about, well, hold on, like, why do you eat Tide Pods? Like what benefit are you getting from Tide Pods? Instead of me telling them. And I think why this one resonates with me so much right now is because I have young children. And if I go to the young children and I say, child, don't jump off that 10-foot bridge, like onto into the river. And they're going to be like, well, Dad, I want to jump off the 10-foot bridge to the river. But if I go, son, what do you think is going to happen if you jump off the 10-foot bridge? And he's like, oh, well, I'm going to land on the water. And I say, how deep do you think the water is under the bridge? Right. And if I ask these questions, you can almost see like the light click in his eyes. And he's like, oh, the water's probably not deep enough. And I'm probably going to like hurt my legs or break my ankles or something. And it's like, yes, son. Yes. But if you come at it the other way, like it doesn't work. Right. I mean,
yep.
So that's the one that resonates with me the most.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a particular one that resonates with me. I kind of feel like these are different tactics that you could employ strategically. But yeah, I think the big takeaway for me from this is highlighted, and the thing I have before this in my notes is the Truth Campaign, which was a campaign to get kids to stop smoking.
Mm-hmm.
And they mentioned that the reason that it was successful was because it didn't tell them to stop smoking.
Yep.
The way that you would tell, people not tell them, specifically to stop smoking would be, you could do it 4 different ways with those different methods that you highlighted there. But I guess if I had to pick one, it would be start with understanding and just kind of highlighting why someone wants to do something or doesn't want to do something. Kind of being naturally curious. That's a kind of carryover from Liminal Thinking by Dave Gray, which, I guess ding the bell. I mentioned that one again.
Ding, ding.
Yeah. But my big takeaway from that was that we have these preconceived notions, this bubble belief that we assemble based on our limited experience. And I remember walking out of that book thinking I need to not resist viewpoints that are contrary to mine, but actually be better if I was able to just seek them out more often. And I try to do that. If you were to follow me around and chronicle how I spend my day, you could probably point out all the places where I fail with that. But that reading that book definitely did adjust my mindset to that. So I like to at least tell myself I'm a little bit more open-minded. And I feel like this is probably my default now when I'm talking to somebody is I want to understand where they're coming from before I just say, well, no, you got to change your mind about things. Again, you could probably point out a whole bunch of times when I've failed at that, but I think that's the one that seems to me to really fit most, at least initially.
Yeah, so building off of that understanding, he puts a diagram in here that basically says understanding, trust, and change, that there are these staircases. It's the staircase, and the steps are understanding. And once we understand each other, we can build trust with each other. And then once we build trust with each other, then I can listen to you more. And I'm less reactive to a negative feeling towards changing for you. Now, one of the things he slides in here is this idea of active listening. And I'm interested to hear what your perspective is on this, because he really doesn't talk about active listening at all in the chapter, but he throws it to an appendix at the end and says like, oh yeah, and if you want to learn more about active listening, go see Appendix A. That's okay, but it feels very like disjointed or disconnected. It's like, oh, and by the way, active listening, like to see that at the end. It's not part of my story right now.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I don't know. I'm familiar with active listening, and there have been books that have kind of hit on that super hard. I guess just for quick review for people, that's kind of where if I'm hearing you right, this is what you're saying. Yes, okay. Well, then at least the person that you're talking to feels heard. Mm-hmm. This is one of my pet peeves, by the way, is not feeling like I've been heard, and I could totally identify a whole bunch of situations where I'll say something and then the person just responds with like, well...
Yeah.
And I'm just like, no, you don't get it.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really valuable technique. I don't know that it's, I guess a case could be made that it should belong as material that's actually in this chapter. I didn't really think about it till you brought it up though, that, why doesn't he go into more detail about that here? I guess maybe he feels like when you start with understanding, that's essentially encapsulates the big takeaway from the active listening process. I mean, obviously he's not talking about the specifics of it, but there's a lot of stuff in this book where, he talks about some stories at the beginning and some principles, and then, what you can actually do about it. It's kind of the formula, I guess, for these types of self-help nonfiction books. But when he gets to the what you can do about it, there's always there's always like a list or something like that. He's a big fan of lists. It's not just the reduced framework at the beginning where he's talking about the different chapters. So maybe it just didn't really fit very cleanly with that, which I guess I could see that. I don't think you should determine the content of the book that way, but I don't know. Maybe he did.
Yeah. Well, it got. I actually noticed it more at the very end of the book, because I felt like the book ended quickly, and then there were these like additional 20 plus pages of like, this appendix. But okay, so let's go on to how he ends every chapter. So he ends every chapter with a case study, and I'm not going to give my opinion yet. I'm going to ask Mike for his opinion first. Mike, what do you think of the case studies in general? Like, did you think they were valuable? Did you like them?
For the most part, I like them. I like the approach of the case studies at the end, and the case studies are different than the stories he shares at the beginning, because those are kind of like teeing up the issue or the problem, and the case study is really highlighting the solution.
Yep.
So I think the case study at the end of the chapter is actually an effective way to close out the chapter. You could argue about the effectiveness of the specific case studies that he chose, but for the most part, I thought those were really good too. And to be honest, there's nothing that was really new in those case studies by the time you got to them.
Agreed.
So I don't think I have any notes on the case studies themselves, but I did think they were really cool. So there was one in particular, and I forget even what chapter it's in, where he's talking about moving people in terms of their opinion on the political spectrum. And he uses two examples of someone who grew up very liberal and became conservative, and then someone who grew up very conservative and became liberal. And they came from the places that you think the conservatives and liberals come from, and just kind of like doesn't have a dog in this fight, or a horse in this race, if you want a different metaphor, I guess. Yep. Maybe that's a better one. And I thought that was pretty cool. Like, there's no agenda here.
Yep.
I feel like most of the books that we read, there is, if you really want to look for it, you can find the agenda in some of the things that people are sharing. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. That I think by the time you hit the case studies, the way he's constructed the book, the case study is really doubling down on the points he was trying to make, and for the most part, they're good. They're good examples of the points he was trying to make. All right, let's move on to chapter 2, endowment. So endowment was the hardest, I think, chapter for me to like wrap my head around, like what we were trying to do. But the idea is basically like, oh, the thing that we have right now has higher value than whatever you want me to pay attention to, right? Like, so if you want me to buy a new car, the car that I have right now is above and beyond, and you're going to have to show me how the thing you want me to get is clearly above and beyond better than what I currently have. So it's like this idea of endowment is like, just what I'm already doing or what I already own. It's almost like you're trying to climb uphill, right? Like you're trying to push the boulder uphill because I'm already like okay with what I'm doing. And he brings up a couple different ideas. You talked about him liking lists, right? So he's got them in almost every chapter. He talks about the surface the cost of inaction, and then burn the ships, which I'm a big fan of burn the ships, but we'll get there.
Me too.
We'll get there in a little bit. So he's got these two different ideas that he uses to drive home his key points for kind of this endowment idea.
Yeah, I don't like the term endowment here. That feels like a word chosen so that it fit the framework that he's trying to use.
Yeah.
I mean, really what he's talking about here is the status quo. So I feel like status quo would have been a much better chapter title if you're just going to take that chapter in isolation and really try to communicate a single specific idea, which I would argue that's what he's doing with his approach to this book. There are no sections. There's just 5 chapters, introduction and an epilogue. So the content and the structure of the book I actually really liked. Don't really like the term here, but in terms of the big ideas, I think that status quo can be a very powerful influence on our decisions, and that's really what he's talking about. Shares lots of studies where, if you already have something, you value it at this. If you were going to buy it new, you would value it at like 1/3 of that. Actually, it's 2.6 times. That's the multiplier for the value for something that we already own versus something that we are looking to acquire. And I think that is a really powerful idea. It's very easy to just stick with something because it's familiar, and mentions that at the end, that terrible things tend to get replaced, but the mediocre things tend to stick around.
Yep.
When things are good, it's easy to just stick with the status quo and not consider any of the other options, which I think is a fairly sad way to live your life. So you could characterize this as something we should be pushing back against and trying to overcome. I don't think that's the framing or the angle that he's coming at this with, because literally in the subtitle, it's how to change anyone's mind. So this is really, I feel like, when you're talking to other people, how to get them to change from the status quo. But I don't know. I mean, my brain just naturally goes to, how would I apply this stuff?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. He references, good to great. So Jim Collins is good to great in here, and the fact that good is the enemy of great. We don't have great schools, principally because we have good schools. We don't have great government, principally because we have good government. And I think this might be, so this is definitely one of my action items. I don't know if it's the only action item yet. I'll figure that out later. But this is definitely one of mine. Is like, I need to look at, essentially do a scan of life and say, what is a situation where I'm settling for good, right? That I could be driving more towards great, but instead I'm settling for good because, it's good enough, right? And I think there are going to be areas where good enough is good enough, and I'm okay with that, and I don't need to push for great in that situation. But I think there are areas where I'm going to say, you know what? I'm not happy with the fact that this area is just good. I want this area to be great, and I want it to be better than that. We'll get to the last section that I really liked, and it's the burn the ships idea.
Yeah.
So I had actually never heard of where burn the ships came from, so I really liked that he went into the background. Cortez basically is coming over, and there's going to be a potential mutiny, and he's like, hold up. We're just going to take those 12 ships that are out there that people want to like get back on and run away from, and we're just burning those things down. Like we're just absolutely going to give people no way out. There's no exit door. And I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that was where the phrase came from. But I really do like the idea of burning the ships, basically making going back no longer an option. So like, what obstacles do you have to set up that way forward is the only direction, and we can't crutch on the things that we've been doing that are good enough. So I liked that idea a lot.
Yeah, I love that visual and that story. But this is actually something that I've been fascinated by for quite a while. So it was interesting to me to see how he talked about this, because that's the popular story. So that's the one that he tells at the beginning. And then you can get into, if you want to find someone to argue with you online, just go say something about burn the boats came from this story, and they'll be like, actually, because there's 3 or 4 other examples, and he hits on all of them. He tells the story behind that one because I think it's the most emotionally appealing. Yeah. But then he covers his historical bases and mentions there are other versions of this story other places.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, but the principle's the same. If you give yourself a way back, you're not going to go all in.
Yeah. All right, you ready to move to 3? Distance?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so distance, basically what he's saying is that if the change you're trying to make is too far away from where the person currently is, or what they're currently thinking, then that you're basically doomed for failure. Like you're never going to get that change because you're in what he would call the zone of rejection, or the region of rejection, that like you're just too far away. So he's got a whole football field analogy where he brings up these football fields in the book, and then he shows you, where people would be in the 20-yard line and the other side of the field and all that stuff. But there's 2 zones. There's the zone of rejection, then there's the zone of acceptance. And essentially what you could think about is like, the further I am away from this idea, the more strongly I'm in the region of rejection, or the zone of rejection. As we get closer to my ability to accept a thing, then I would be in like the middle. What's the phrase, Mike? There's the something middle. I'm forgetting
I don't remember the term for it, and I don't have the book in front of me, but I do know what you're talking about. There's like the
movable middle is what he calls it.
Yes.
He calls it the movable middle. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's like there's this section of the field where there's the movable middle where I can convince you. It's going to take some work, but I actually have a chance of convincing you. And then there's the whole like zone of acceptance where it's like, yeah, I'm already on board. Like you didn't have to change. Like I'm with you. And what he's basically saying is, let's reduce the distance. And if I can reduce the distance, then I can bring you closer to changing your mind, or I can bring you closer to coming over to the thing that I want you to do, or the way that I want you to think. And he calls out again this list of 3. find the movable middle, ask for less, and then switch the field, which I'm guessing we'll unpack something in this list at some point, but I've droned on for a little while. So Mike, hit me with your thoughts on chapter 3.
Well, chapter 3 is interesting because he's talking about this in terms of convincing somebody politically. This is probably the chapter which has that case study that I was mentioning earlier. But when he's talking about how you're not going to get somebody to convert to your way of thinking simply by sharing a whole bunch of facts or a whole bunch of evidence. In fact, he specifically says that sharing evidence often blows up in our faces. He also mentions in here that people search for, interpret, and favor information in a way that confirms or supports their existing beliefs. I mean, this is liminal thinking in a nutshell, this chapter. But the thing that really stood out to me as I was reflecting on what I read here is that if you want to change somebody's mind, so that's the framing, and that's the one that I think I have a little bit of issue with. Not that it's wrong, but it just kind of rubs me the wrong way. So if you want to change somebody's mind, the way to do it is to make a whole bunch of small asks and get them to say yes a bunch of times. And each time they say yes, they're more likely to say yes again. And that rubbed me the wrong way because that's exactly the yes ladder from marketing, which there's truth to that. I mean, if you want to sell something, I don't know exactly where I land on this, because I think that there are elements of that I incorporate into my stuff, but I'm not just trying to get a sale. I'm trying to offer a solution to a problem that people are experiencing. So going back to like the simple marketing for smart people that we read, I feel like that's a much better approach than following this mechanical script. And if I could just get somebody to say yes this many times, then regardless of who they are and regardless of how much money they have and regardless of whether I'm the right person to solve their problem, they're more likely to buy my thing. I actually sent an email when I launched Life HQ. It said why I don't want everybody to buy Life HQ. So I could see that the seeds of that, and that's the implementation of that yes ladder that I've had experience with other places that I've worked, and I was like, this doesn't feel great.
So let me tell you the reason why this frustrates me is because in my idealistic mind, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying in my idealistic mind, we're settling for less of a good solution. So it's like when I ask for less, we're like making the joint agreement that like, okay, there is a better solution out there, but what am I have to do? I'm going to have to do part of that. And then 2 years from now, I'm gonna have to do the next part of that. And all I think about in my mind is this is the most efficient or inefficient way to get to the change that we both know we need to do. But you're telling me that like we can't do it right now. And it drives me crazy, but I don't disagree that human psychology says that makes total sense. Like I can get you to agree to a smaller change and then another smaller change and another smaller change. I just don't understand why if we can agree that this is the way it needs to be, why does it need to be that way 3 years from now? Why not now? Right? Like we should just make that change now.
I don't know. I mean, the whole thing here is getting somebody to change their mind, and you get them to do or say or vote, the way that you want them to. It just feels a little bit manipulative. And I'm not saying that there's never a place to use this kind of stuff, but I feel like if I were to summarize this, my takeaways would be to try to find the middle ground, figure out what we can agree on, but then kind of disconnect from, I gotta convince this person to do things my way. Mm-hmm. Like I think there's an element of this, at least for me, where you have to be okay with, I may never actually change their mind. That's okay. But that's like kind of contrary to the whole messaging of the book. So I don't know. At least I think it is. Do you think that's accurate? Is that the message that comes across in the book?
Well, I think he's presenting if you do these things, you will be effective at changing anybody's mind. which so it's like, I think my answer to you is yes. I think there's two different ideas here that are working. You're saying like that shouldn't be my goal. My goal shouldn't be necessarily to 100% change your mind, but he's saying if you do these things, you'll be closer to changing someone's mind. And I think he goes strong on it in the subtitle of the book, How to Change Anyone's Mind. So it leads us to believe that, yeah.
So I get it. If you're a political activist and you're canvassing for votes and you're trying to get people to vote a certain way, I think in that scenario, and he uses that example in this chapter, I can't fault you for this, but I really struggle with finding a scenario in my everyday regular life where I would feel okay doing this. Just taking that approach. I mean, even if I was a leader in an organization or preaching at my church or whatever, I feel like you extend the invitation and you, even as a leader, you say, this is where we're going and this is why, and would love to have you on board, but you're not trying to convince somebody to say, okay, yeah, I'm going to do it your way. It's like, if this isn't for you, that's fine. You can go somewhere else. You can do something else. No hard feelings. You don't have to be here.
I see your perspective more now. Like as you talk about it, I understand your perspective more now. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, it just feels a little bit weird to me. I probably do like elements of this, but getting to the point where he's describing, where you actually have changed the way that somebody thinks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. And I don't have anybody in my life where this is really the thing that I'm trying to do. Like he's talking about interventions for people who are drug addicts. You have a loved one who doesn't understand the problems that they're facing. Like they think they're in control, but they're really not. So privileged situation, I guess, where I don't have to deal with that sort of thing. But I just don't have a situation like that where I feel like, yeah, that's a lever I got to pull.
Okay. Can I give you an example of one where I do?
Sure.
So I'll get certain students in class and they just have this mindset of, oh, I can't do X. Right. And it's like, and I have to be in a situation because like giving them the like, well, you don't have to be here. That's not a good option. Right. Like, I mean, they want to be here. They want to get the degree. They want to then eventually go and do the type of work that we're training them to do. So it's like, I don't want to pull that card because that defeats the purpose of everybody involved. But I need to convince them and I need to try to get them to understand you can do this. You may not be able to do it the same way that your peer sitting across the table from you does it, but that doesn't mean you can't do this. So it's like I do have to push a little harder in helping them get out of that situation where they're just so, focused on the fact that I can't.
That's fair. And I think I can get on board with that. But the natural extension of that, and one of the things that I've been wrestling through is like parenting, because you can't just be like, okay, well, you don't like it. You don't have to be a part of the family anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's not a thing either. But also just the whole approach of I'm not trying to convince my 2-year-old that it's time to go to bed.
Yep.
It is time to go to bed. We're not having a conversation about this. So I'm trying to resolve this in my mind still. And maybe that's a terrible example of like the 2-year-old, because there is a point, especially with real little kids, where you're the caregiver and you understand things better than they do. So you're not going to let them, choose what the menu is, because you're going to have pizza and ice cream for dinner every single night. And that's not healthy. It's going to have long-term damage and stuff like that. So I don't know, but I feel like the approach that we try to take with our kids is, this is the way that we do things as a family unit. This is, the family is led by my wife and I. You have input. Now, I remember specifically we had a conversation with our kids a while back about managing screen time. And this was several years ago at the time. Like our oldest was probably 13, 14. And they each had like a half-hour video game time a day. And we talked about how we can't, keep managing this, telling you it's time to wrap up, because repeat that 4 times, 5 times, it's a lot. Mm-hmm. So, we want to, what do you guys think we should do? And what do you think we actually asked the question, what do you think is fair? And they threw out an hour. So double the screen time that they were getting. Like, okay, well, we can try that, but we're not going to have to manage it then. So we're going to get this time timer, and you're going to be done by the time the time timer goes out.
Mm-hmm.
And if you aren't, you're going to lose it the next day, because again, the goal here is that we don't have to micromanage this. It's frustrating for you. It's frustrating for us. So we, arrived at this mutual outcome. But again, like I don't see where I would be trying to convince them that this is the right thing to do. It's either, as the leader, this is the decision that has been made, and I will help you work through it.
Yep. Yeah.
Or the other one, kind of what you're talking about at the beginning, is I'm going to go into it curious and figure out where you stand, and we'll try to meet in the middle, but I'm not going to try to bring you back over to my side necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that. I can see that. I think there are a bunch of different contexts, and some work better than others for especially this one, the idea of distance and, kind of getting people to come on board. All right, you ready for the next one? Uncertainty?
Yep.
All right, so chapter 4 is uncertainty. I thought this chapter made a lot of sense in terms of, we do need to reduce uncertainty, because if we're trying to get somebody to change something, if there is a moderate level of uncertainty on the other side of that, we're just putting up a big wall. Part of the reason why maybe this resonated so well with me is because I feel like this, like I basically thought he was describing me in this book. I was like, or in this chapter, I was like, oh man, yes. Like if there is uncertainty, my uncertainty tax is huge. I'm like, I know what I'm getting right now. I don't know what I'm going to get with you. So I'm a little bit nervous for that. So he talks about uncertainty tax, which is basically the mental and or emotional or whatever it might be, like challenge that we would have to overcome this change and accept it. But then he goes quickly into this idea of trialability. Yep. Trialability, like how able am I to try something and then decide whether I like it or not. And what I really liked about this trialability section is the 4 examples that he gives. Basically the freemium model, the reduce upfront cost, the drive discovery, and then to make it reversible. I thought these were spot on in terms of like, oh yeah, if you give me any of the 4 of those, that makes total sense that it's going to reduce my uncertainty for a thing, and it's going to make me more likely to consider yours. Now, one of the areas where I don't think he stressed it enough is it's also going to give me the ability to throw yours away faster. So it's like if I try yours and it doesn't resonate with me, or it doesn't do the thing you said it was going to do, I'm done. Like I made my decision and I'm not changing in your direction. So I think there's a whole side of this that is possibly negative, but at the same time, it's these 4 things also do apply to reducing uncertainty. So I can't fault him on that.
Yeah. So I liked this chapter the best. And the reason is that it really got me thinking about how I can reduce uncertainty for the products that I sell.
Understood. Yep.
So that's my action item. Is how do I make it easier for people to try my products and services? And case in point is Life HQ, where I did a whole bunch of research and I saw what other people were doing with this sort of thing, because it's really a done-for-you Obsidian Vault. You download it, you open it in Obsidian. All the plugins are pre-configured. All the settings are set up for you, and you can just start using it. And once you have that file and you've opened it on your computer, that's basically it. There's no way to make sure that someone deletes that from their system, so you can't turn off access to it. Mm-hmm. Which means that the best practice from all the other people I've seen who've done this sort of thing is like there is no 30-day money back guarantee for this sort of thing. And that's always kind of bugged me, that I haven't been able to offer that, and I'm not really ready to make a commitment that that's something I'm gonna add. But it's got me thinking, like, how would I add that to Life HQ? But then I'm also in the middle of redoing all the other stuff on my website, and the one that I'm really thinking about now is the library, my private community, because I really want to include with that the cohort stuff and the workshops. And if you want to follow along with your personal retreat and join an accountability group so you actually follow through and take action on your goals, like all of that is there. I'm getting ready to relaunch that. You can't join it right now, but I'm working on the page and I'm thinking through the offer. And I think what I want to figure out a way to do is to incorporate some of this stuff where people can kind of try it out. And I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if it's like a free trial for 2 weeks or if it's a light version that has some of the stuff, but not all of the stuff, where like you could show up and talk about PKM and maybe join a live call. But then like the bigger one is the one where you are, you're actually doing the stuff. So you're joining the groups and you've got the accountability built in there. I don't know, but it's got my wheels turning. And I think this is something that is kind of piggybacks off of everything that I was learning at the Newsletter Marketing Summit too. Like this is something that's missing for me right now. It's really like if you have listened to every episode of Bookworm and you've gone through one of my cohorts before, yeah, you're a raving fan. Like you speak highly, you leave the testimonials, but everybody else who has no idea who I am, that's a big ask to drop that much money on a product or on a subscription. And I get that. And I want to figure out a way to reduce that, but I have no idea what it looks like. It's probably a combination of some of those things that you were talking about, the freemium, free trial, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Not to take us too far into this topic, but like, as you're talking about it, a couple of things that popped into my head. Sean Blanc did the iPad journaling, right? If you remember, he created the iPad journal that worked with which one? GoodNotes? I think it worked with GoodNotes.
The planner thing that you're talking about? Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he would do a free trial on that. Well, I bought it and it did not fit with me. Like it just 100% did not resonate with me. But he gave you a money back guarantee. Like if you tried it and didn't like it. And what I'll say is I realized I didn't like it. Right. I submitted for the refund on it because it wasn't a zero, it was a decent amount of money on it, but I never looked at it again. Like, so if you think about like Life HQ for like that product, if it doesn't resonate with people, they're like the bigger worry that you have going into that is that they somehow post it somewhere and then other people can download it for free. Like that is the problem. I don't think it's people trying to like scam you on like, oh, I'm just going to tell you I didn't like it and then I got a free copy of this. Because I really think like people either like it or they don't. I think it's more did they post it somewhere else? For the community membership, man, that one's a harder one. Like how do you give them a 7-day thing into the community? But because that's a lot to manage. Like then you got to kick them out when they're 7 days doesn't come up. So
that's that's the hard thing. So like but I get that it's a big ask to just join a community that costs multiple hundreds of dollars per year. You've got to be able to, putting myself in the shoes of someone who's joined multiple communities like that, it would be cool to have like a light version of that where I can spend, $50 a year or something and I can join an occasional live call and I can just talk with other people who are interested in the thing. Kind of getting back to the Newsletter Marketing Summit, one of the things that they were talking about was building communities. And they aren't talking about circle communities necessarily. A lot of their communities are, Discord servers or whatever. And there are lots of people who have free communities and there are lots of people who have paid communities. And there are values for both. And as I was thinking through, like, what do I want Practical PKM in the library to become? I really want it to be the place to hang out and talk about PKM for serious sense makers who want to learn, share, and grow together. So I feel like there's probably multiple tiers here for people who want different levels of support on their PKM and creative, productive journeys. And I don't know exactly what the product offering looks like there. I just know that I've got to diversify that a little bit, I think. But I think this whole idea of uncertainty, thinking through why do I do what I do as an internet creator, going all the way back to my life theme, I want to help people multiply their time and talents, leave a bigger dent in the universe. There's no single way that I do that. There's multiple ways and really there's unlimited ways. And I got to figure out which ones are the ones that really are a fit for me. But then I don't think it's as simple as, well, I'm just going to do this one thing and that's going to be, the way that I help people do the thing. Maybe if I do this long enough and I build a big enough audience, I do get to that point. But I'm certainly not there, not there yet. And I know that there are a whole bunch of people, even in, the less than 8,000 people that are on my newsletter list right now, that I could better serve them in ways that are currently not being offered. And so I'm just trying to consider all of the options right now.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, direct application of this book to you is, so you're thinking about all that stuff. Uncertainty is only one of the things, because it's like, I may have the way that I think I'm really good at this. I don't need your tool, when your tool is significantly better than what I'm doing right now. It's just like, I just have that quote unquote endowed idea that I'm like, oh, I don't need your thing. Or like, I've got a negative reaction. Why would I do it your way? Like, I can do it my own, So the funny thing about this book is, for as much as I don't like reduce, it actually applies, right? Like the reactance, endowment, distance, uncertainty, like it applies really, really well and really, really valuably, I think, when you look through this. Before we move to the next chapter, I have a question for you. Have you read Diffusion of Innovations by Everett M. Rogers?
I've never even heard of it. No.
Okay. So this book is, anybody who's in the like wanting to make change, transformation, innovation, like those kind of things. Diffusion of Innovations is a really interesting book. I've not read all of it in its entirety, but I've like picked out different sections of it and have read different sections of it for different things I've done in my kind of my engineering ed research work. But it gets put on the level of like Crossing the Chasm and The Innovator's Dilemma, and like anybody who's thinking about this idea of like creating things and making, transforming, innovating, like those kind of things. It's at the same level. I just didn't know where it came from. So it was cool to hear. It was cool to hear the story about like, oh, he was trying to figure out how to get people to use different farming techniques. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty neat, background story to that book. So I just thought that was interesting.
Nice.
Are you ready to go to corroborating evidence, our only one with 2 words?
Yeah, let's go to the last 2 chapters. Chapter.
I get mixed up on this one because the way my brain works is we're going to reduce reactance, we're going to reduce endowment, we're going to reduce distance, we're going to reduce uncertainty, we're going to reduce corroborating wait, so it's like this one kind of breaks my brain a little bit. Now, he says in here that a lot of times we just try to throw more evidence at people, and it's almost like we don't listen to what they're saying. We just keep throwing evidence at them and expecting it to at some point, turn it over. So I get I get that aspect of it, but I don't think that was the driver of his chapter. I actually think the driver of the chapter was reduce translation problems. Like reduce these ideas to where it's like you and I aren't talking the same level here. You're like, I have one idea, you have another idea. I want you to come over to my idea. We aren't translating that well, and we need to reduce the friction between our translation. But I'm going to do that with evidence, but I don't want to reduce the evidence. I want to use the right evidence in order to do that. So the whole like structure of the framework, like my brain went, what do I do? Like, what do I do with the structure of the framework? That said, as we've said many times, I think this is the good idea. If I look at it from the translation side, I've got weak attitudes, I've got strong attitudes. So he calls out these different types of attitudes. Weak are the ones where essentially it's easy to change. Like I'm not super strong on the way I feel about this thing. Like if you asked me, let's see, what's one? If you ask me Domino's Pizza versus Little Caesars, right? Like I don't have a strong attitude about either of those. It's like, oh, it's pizza and it's like cheap pizza. So cool. Like I'm in, right? Like whatever you want. If you asked you about one type of coffee versus Starbucks coffee, like one of your frou-frou coffees versus Starbucks coffee, you're probably gonna have a strong attitude about that. So getting you to change over to Starbucks is probably not going to go that well. So it's those ones where you need more evidence in order to change. He does the same thing with the lists here. He says, consider who you're asking to change, consider when you're asking them to change, consider when you're giving them the evidence, and then consider how you're deploying those pieces of evidence, because you only have scarce resources to do it. So that's essentially the essence of the chapter. Mike, what do you think?
I hate this title. Corroborating evidence makes
Yep.
no sense.
Yep.
You know what this really is? This is social proof.
Yeah.
And there really isn't another term for that. The other term, I guess, which is negative, so I don't think I would use this one, would be like herd mentality.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I can see that. Yeah.
But corroborating evidence makes zero sense, at least from a label perspective. Now, he does a great job of explaining it in the chapter, but I feel like if you really want this point to stick, social proof is the term that should be used here. So these notes that I have where you're trying to overcome the translation problem that you were talking about, and just, I've got a couple other things jotted down here. I want you to just kind of picture the term social proof instead of corroborating evidence as I read through these. Okay, multiple sources saying you're doing something solves the translation problem. The sources contribute more when they're varied. The closer information is received together, the more valuable it becomes in instigating change. Concentrating resources becomes important when is required. Fill in the blank there. Okay, as you think about that through terms of social proof, does that not paint a more specific, vivid picture that you can do more with than corroborating evidence?
So in my note system, I just changed the title, and in parentheses I put should be social proof, because like everything you said there makes so much more sense if we think social proof. Everything you said.
Yeah, exactly. So missed opportunity, I guess, but I get why he's corroborating evidence because it fits with the acrostic. I just think it's the wrong choice. I think this is the right concept. Like the last part of the 5-step framework, this is definitely it. Like that fits. All of the material in the chapter fits, but this is social proof. And as I was thinking about that, once I got that revelation, basically, oh, this is social proof, that's where this gets a lot more applicable to me. And this is where, and I'm approaching this from the products and services, as I talked about in the last chapter, and how do I better meet the needs of the people that I serve. I realize I've got to have way more conversations. I've got to ask for feedback. Again, all this stuff is like kind of highlighted to me from my takeaways from the Newsletter Marketing Summit that I just got back from too. So you can actually see like there were 6 lessons that I kind of solidified on for the newsletter. Then there were a couple things in there that were uncomfortable for me. I want to solicit feedback from people. I want to hear from people. This is the specific question I have. This is the problem that I'm facing. This is the point where I'm getting stuck. Now, if I'm going to do that, obviously it's on me to develop the solutions to those problems. But as I do that, that's where social proof really comes in. So as I'm thinking through this, like social proof, the most effective way to sell my product, whatever that product is, library, Life HQ, whatever, is to have a whole bunch of testimonials, but not just a whole bunch of testimonials from a whole bunch of white dudes who have used a Mac for 30 years.
Yeah.
Right? It's different people in different scenarios, different backgrounds who I was able to help. And if you see on those testimonial walls, people who aren't just, they're not saying the same thing. They're not coming from the same perspective. The most effective testimonials, I think, are the ones from that kind of create a tapestry of the types of people and problems that can be solved by using the product. That's really what he's talking about here, where if the sources are more varied, then they're more valuable. That's something I'm kind of aspiring to. I don't think I have that. I've got a whole bunch of testimonials for my products, but I haven't been real intentional about the way that I've gone about collecting these things. So I don't have a specific action item with this chapter in particular, other than, if I really want to convince somebody that I have a solution to their problem. And again, I don't want everybody to buy Life HQ. If you are not that interested in Obsidian, this is not the thing for you. But I do want to figure out a way that I can solve the right problem for the right people more often, if that makes sense. And I feel like I got to pay a little bit more attention to this, and not just, I got another testimonial. That's great. But really, where are the holes in my marketing messaging. But again, marketing not in the terms of how do I get you to pull the slot machine lever and make the transaction, but enter into a relationship where I can actually help you take Obsidian to the next level. Like, that's exciting to me when I think about that. So maybe that's the wrong way to think about, the catalyst. We're getting into the epilogue next, and so we're kind of rounding the corner here. But I'm not thinking through. My perspective as reading this book is not how do I convince somebody in an argument or conversation to adopt my point of view, but how do I communicate my message so that educated people can make the right decision for them more effectively.
Yep. Yeah, you're much more on the side of Billy Broaz than you are.
I guess,
on this side.
That book really is coming through, I guess, in my reaction to this one.
Yeah. Okay, so let's roll to the epilogue. So the epilogue basically is a gigantic. This is all the stuff I just told you, and here's some really concise tables and some really bullet point items for each one of them. I don't believe, Mike, you can correct me where I'm wrong. I don't believe there was anything new in the epilogue. I think it's all a regurgitation of what was talked about before.
In terms of general ideas, yes. I think there are a couple of things that kind of stand out to me from this epilogue, though. One is that the media often uses a broad brush to depict each side in a conflict. And then the story that they really talk about at the beginning of the epilogue is this organization, Seeds of Change. Do you remember this story?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, which is fascinating to me and probably is even more relevant now than when this book was written. But it's essentially like a summer camp for Israeli and Palestinian kids.
And actually, Israeli, Palestinian, and Egyptian.
Okay, and Egyptian, yeah. But basically, they're getting people who typically do not see eye to eye on things, and they put them in a place where they have to learn to coexist, and then they do things like ropes courses and trust falls, and it's like, this person that I hate, I have to trust now. And little by little, they kind of chip away at these stereotypes and prejudices that people typically have, and it changes their perspective for their entire lives. So I think that's pretty cool. First of all, like it's a cool story. He's got specific reasons why this organization is successful that back up what he just told us in the rest of the book. But I think that's a really powerful way to tie it all together. And then, there are the tables and all that kind of stuff. I didn't get much out of the tables, but I guess, often we're blindly, we are so blinded by the belief that we're right that we tend to believe more evidence is enough to convince and change people. And it's not. And then there's a quote that I really liked by Kurt Lewin, who said that if you want to truly understand something, try to change it. So I was thinking about that. There are a lot of things where I can understand my tendency, and I feel like I don't often just launch into verbally, well, I'm just going to convince people anymore. Like, I understand that that's not going to work, and I've just kind of, ain't nobody got time for that, So, but I want to consider that quote in terms of like the things that I see. I guess the place where this is probably most applicable is at home, because my wife would probably say that I launch into problem solving mode a little too quickly, where it's just like, oh, well, we got to do this and we got to do that, and you got to do this and you got to do that. And she's like, no, you just need to listen.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think maybe my default can be, well, I understand this stuff, but I jump to that conclusion a little bit too quickly. And so I want to, there's no action items specifically associated with this other than try to really understand what is going on here. And if you haven't, dug into it and gotten your hands dirty, you probably don't understand it yet.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So before we go into action items, there's an appendix, or there are 3 appendices, right? Or so one appendix with 3 sections. I don't know if it's 3 appendices or whatever it is, but like one is for active listening, which we talked about already. One is for applying freemium. and then one is for force field analysis. And the only reason I'm bringing these three up isn't because of like how amazing they were or anything like that. It's because one of my action items comes from this. So force field
Okay.
analysis, right? We would call this in my engineering world, we would call this root cause analysis. Except for this is more specific to change, right? So when you're doing your force field analysis, you're trying to figure out what are the drivers for change, and then what are the he calls them restrainers, or what are the resistance mechanisms for change, and then can you figure out what the change is, identify the drivers, identify the strainers, and then develop an action plan along those lines. So how do we, accentuate the drivers and overcome the restrainers? So I have an action item related to this. So now we can move into action items. So I'll start because it's my book. So what are my action items? One is, where am I settling for good instead of great? So I want to think about just kind of a broad landscape of my life and saying, hey, am I settling for good instead of great in any areas? And am I okay with that? The key aspect of that is, am I okay with it? Because I think there's going to be areas where I settle for good and I'm totally fine. Like, I am not upset about that at all. I think there's going to be some areas where I don't as well.
Yeah, that's an important difference there. It's not, is change or improvement possible, but given my limited resources, where do I want to focus my efforts?
Exactly. Okay, so then my second one is, I want to do a force field analysis on something. I don't really care what it is, and I'm also, if this one doesn't get a green check mark, I will be totally fine. But it's like, I want to figure out, like, oh, here's something. Let's just do a force field analysis, just because I think it'd be fun to do. I think it'd be an interesting thing, thought exercise for me. So, Mike, what are your action items?
Cool. Well, I just have the one official one, which is, how can I make it easier for people to trial my products and services? And trial being the trial ability, reducing the uncertainty, reducing the risk associated with something. I recognize that, Life HQ is almost $300. The library is a premium membership, so it's going to be expensive. And I totally get why people would be reluctant to just drop that much money. The tricky part for me is, I think just lowering the cost is not the appropriate solution either, because the thing is that valuable. Especially with the feedback that I've gotten with Life HQ, it's kind of like the majority of it is, I can't believe everything that's in here.
Yeah.
So how do I, find the balance between charging what something is actually worth to the marketplace, and then making things more approachable for people. Essentially, finding the right mix, which allows me to help as many people as I can in the most effective way as I can. That's really the encapsulation of what all my business stuff is. And I don't think I've really got clarity on that yet.
Okay. All right. We'll move to style and rating. I'll start us off. I am torn on this one. So normally I just come out and I'm like, I know what my rating is right away. Man, I'm torn on this one because I can't tell you that I love the style. Like, I didn't mind the stories that were told in between. I didn't mind the case studies that were done afterwards. I thought the content was valuable, and it was an easy read. It wasn't a difficult read. But there is just something about the book that I'm just left going, okay, like it was an okay book. I actually think I'll remember some of the stuff that came out of the book, like, oh, reduce the following things to help, if you want to get change. But I just wasn't wowed by anything about the book. Like, so, and then I go with would I recommend this to other people? I don't know. Like, I don't know if I would recommend this to other people. If somebody tells me, like, oh, there's this thing happening in my organization or, my work or whatever it is, and it's like, and I really need this change. I really think we would be better if this change thing could happen. Then I might say, like, hey, I read this book once. It's called The Catalyst. You might want to, like, look through it. But I don't think I'm just going to randomly go around and be like, hey, I read this book called The Catalyst, and it's amazing. And, like, you should definitely go look at it. So like, I'm torn on this one because I think the rating I want to give it for some reason just feels too low, but I don't think it's the wrong rating. So all of that being said, I know this doesn't make sense, or I guess I'm kind of waffling back and forth as I'm trying to make my final decision. I'm going to give it 3 stars. And like the 3 stars are completely like, I think the information in the book is fairly good. It's high quality. The packaging of it was give or take, and I probably wouldn't recommend it to too many people after having read it to it. That being said, last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it to you, Mike. It's a short book. Like, I mean, you can read this in a weekend. Like, I mean, it's not a long book, and especially if you like are willing to like not go into as much detail on some of the stories that he tells. And just kind of skim through those and get the gist of them. It is not a very challenging or long book to read. So 3 stars is my rating. Mike, we'll move to you.
All right. Well, I think this is more than a 3-star book. So I'll tell you right now, I'm going to give it 4.
Okay.
I don't think it's, the best book I ever read. It could be the best book on changing someone's mind that I've ever read. I think thinking back to Influence by Robert Cialdini. So that's kind of how we landed here. So this was recommended by Mark, and Mark mentioned this is the best book on, I forget the term he used, but basically like if you don't want to read Influence because it's 600 pages, you should read this one because it's better anyways. And I do think it's better than what I remember of Influence by Robert Cialdini, even though that's kind of the industry standard, like the gold standard, the one that everybody holds up as the definitive work on the subject. Okay. Now, this isn't a strictly marketing book. Like that's the vibe I remember getting from Influence by Robert Cialdini. And I don't think that that book and the 48 Laws of Power, for example, Robert Greene, I think they get a little bit of a bad rap because it's really just talking about principles of human behavior, and yeah, you can use them for nefarious purposes, but it's really not a manipulation manual per se. That's just the vibe I remember getting from reading those, and that's totally absent from this particular book. So I think there are instances where I would probably recommend this. I don't think they're going to be all that often.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe in some of the creator circles that I run in, I shared, that what got my wheels turning was how do I use this in my creator business from a marketing perspective, not sleazy marketing, but just, effective marketing. And it could be the fact that we read Simple Marketing for Smart People not too long ago, and that sort of primed the pump here. I definitely had takeaways from this book in areas that it didn't speak to necessarily, at least not directly. Okay. So as we talk through this, maybe my interpretation of this book and the concepts in it is going to be unique and different from just about anybody else who picks this up. I think there's a non-zero chance that is actually the case. Yeah. That being said, I thought this was a really good book. I really liked the stories at the beginning of the chapters. I liked the presentation of the information and the concepts. I could give or take the listicles and the framework I thought was ineffective for me, but I get why somebody would do that. And I don't think that necessarily like downgrades. I'm not knocking down the rating for the book because of that. I like the case studies a lot at the end. Most of the time when people tack stuff on at the end of a chapter like that, I get to it and I'm like, I have to fight real hard not to skim it. That didn't happen this time. Like I read all those case studies. They were good.
Yeah, see, I skimmed multiple of them. Right, I just didn't think they were that. I didn't think they were that interesting. So
yeah, well, I didn't think the appendices were all that interesting. I didn't even really look at those to tell you.
See, and I did. I thought the appendices were interesting. Okay.
So yeah, I'm really glad that we read this one. Thank you to Mark for recommending it. But I don't think it's a wholly life-changing book for me either at this point. So that's why I'm going to give it 4 stars instead of 5. I think if you, and I say all this because I think there are situations where this absolutely would be a 5-star life-changing book. They just aren't for me, at least not right now.
I agree. I can see a scenario where I read this book at the right time and it's a 5-star book for me.
Yes, exactly.
Right now it's a 3-star book for me.
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
So,
and I hope, can I make a disclaimer here? I hope
Yeah.
Mark doesn't think that it's like, oh, that was a bad suggestion. No. I love reading books. I love being exposed to new knowledge. So it's like, Mark, I'm totally happy that they read it. It just doesn't get a good rating for me. So,
Well, I think, I would consider 4 stars a good rating. And I feel like that's, a general encapsulation of the value of the book for most people in most situations. But yeah, I think 4, but it could definitely skew higher for me. I think I have trouble thinking how it could possibly be lower for me, because I feel like this is the sort of information where even if you don't have use for it right now, this specific moment, you will at some point in your life. So if I were to make a list of these are the 100 books that you should read before you die, because people have done stuff like that. I think this is probably on it, to be honest, or something like this. This topic is important to understand, I feel. And I don't confess to have a comprehensive knowledge of it just because I read this one book. But, why do we read books? I think part of it is, sometimes I'll tell people, if you are looking for a book to read, just consider whatever problem you're wrestling with and find a book that you think could solve that problem. And chances are you'll get a lot out of it. And that, I wouldn't say that was the case for me with this one, but even, taking that aside, I feel like there's stuff here that I'm going to continue to use for years. I may not recall, it was the catalyst that I read that triggered this thing in me, but my gut feel from having read this is that there's some stuff in this book where, even though it's short and even though my mind map isn't crazy huge like some of the other ones that I've made, there's going to be some stuff here that's going to stick for a while.
Yeah. I think you and I have different levels on, because everything you're describing, I'm like, yeah, I agree. Like I'm in, but I'm like, it's still a 3. Like I maybe it's a 3.5. Maybe your 4 is my 3.5. Like I think that's kind of where we're.
So that's the other thing here is calibrating the scales, because people will look at my daily question stuff that I do and they're like, this is completely useless. You rate everything 6 and above, and that's because I've been doing this stuff long enough and it's based on my intention. I have a picture in my mind of what a 0 or a 1 looks like. And every day I do something that, means it's not that. So most of my ratings do tend to be 3 and above. Does that mean that I love every book that we've covered? No, but I don't think I've ever given a bookworm book a single star. I've been able to find something in there that's valuable, and just my personal interpretation means that that's at least a 2-star book. Maybe Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was the exception. That was the book I viscerally hated.
Yeah, I was gonna say you loved that book, didn't you? You just.
But I think even that one, I tend to think more positively when I'm assigning these ratings, and I think that's just personality. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, what was it that you gave 1 star to? Was it Radical Candor?
I don't remember, but it was recent. All I remember is there was a book we read recently that I just did not like.
Yeah, but that's cool. I don't fault you for that. I don't think you're wrong for that. I just I recognize that my internal scale, is kind of calibrated to be a little bit nicer, maybe.
No, so it was 101 essays that'll change the way you think. That was the one that I gave
that's right. That's right.
I mean, I just nope. I had nothing for that one. Okay, so let's move on. So we're gonna go ahead and put the Catalyst on the shelf. Mike, tell us about our next book that we're reading.
The next book is Tiny Experiments by Anne-Laure Lecunff, and I just now discovered, since I'm back from Austin, that she was actually in Austin while I was there. I believe she's got a book signing thing that she's doing, which this is a the magic of podcasting. We're recording this, roughly 2 weeks before it comes out. So, by the time you have heard this, it's already happened. But kind of bummed that I couldn't hang out in Austin another couple days and actually go meet her.
Yeah, I can see that.
But this is a good book. I got a pre-release copy of this. By the time that this comes out, my interview with her for the Focus podcast will be available. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. Have you started reading this yet?
I haven't started reading it yet, but I will tonight. I'll start reading it today. Yeah.
Okay, cool. What's after that?
So after that, we are going to do a listener recommendation. Okay, this book is called Inner Excellence: Train Your Mind for Extraordinary Performance in the Best Possible Life, and it's by Jim Murphy. I can tell you right now that I'm excited to read this book, and it's mainly in the subtitle, and the best possible life, right? Like, we have set the bar really high on this book because I'm just really intrigued if this book can help me get to my best possible life. But we're gonna take a look at this one. This one got popular. Mike reminded me of this. I didn't remember it when we were first talking about it. Mike reminded me that this got popular because one of the Eagles receivers, was it a receiver?
Yeah.
He would read this on the sideline.
Yeah. So the story here is it was a playoff game. I think it might have been the NFC Championship game.
Okay.
And I believe the receiver's name is AJ Brown. I'm terrible with NFL names, but he's like an all-pro receiver. And, he had just come off the field. I don't know, remember if it was like a touchdown that he had scored or they punted or whatever, but he apparently does this all the time. He reads on the sideline. So he comes off the field, and because it was a high-profile game, he's a high-profile player. The camera happens to capture him reading a book on the sideline, which in and of itself, the announcers are having a heyday with that, and like, oh my gosh, look at AJ Brown. He's not invested in the game. He's reading a book on the sideline. And then afterwards, he's like, no, I do that all the time. And the book that he happened to be reading was this book, Inner Excellence. And so immediately, once that book was identified, it jumps to the top of the Amazon bestsellers list. And apparently, it's been around for a while. A lot of the blurbs that are associated with this book are from like PGA Tour pros, where something where, in golf, the distance between the very best in the world and people who barely make the cut is not the physical tools. It's the mental toughness. And so I feel like that's a pretty cool topic. But by the way, this was a recommendation. So thank you to Carol for recommending this one via the form, which will be in the show notes. If you want to recommend a book for Bookworm, please go do that. By the way, regarding blurbs, I forgot to mention this when we were in the actual episode. You were talking about Good to Great by Jim Collins.
Mm-hmm.
Jim Collins actually blurbed this book. Did you notice that?
Hold on, which one? The Catalyst?
The Catalyst,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember reading that, yeah.
Yeah, so the blurbs for this book are crazy. There's Jim Collins, there's Robert Cialdini, Daniel Pink, Charles Duhigg, so kind of interesting who has recommended the Catalyst. I have to admit, most of the time the blurbs do nothing for me because I know how the system works. You get your buddies to blurb your book, and then they blurb, and then you blurb their book, and it's kind of a virtuous cycle of social proof. But this one, I'm looking at the list, and I'm like, okay, that's actually impressive.
Awesome. All right, let's move on to Gap books. Mike, do you have any Gap books right now?
Not officially. Well, I'll share this one because this might have been a Gap book previously. But I just picked it up as I was looking for something in between. I don't know that I'm actually going to finish this, but I am currently reading $1 Million Weekend by Noah Kagan.
Okay.
Noah Kagan is the guy behind AppSumo, and he was like employee number 6, I think, at Facebook. This is a book not about starting a business that is going to make $1 million in a weekend, but really how to create a solid business plan for a business that will grow to be $1 million business in a weekend. So really it's like putting a time frame around, just getting started with something, but not promising that you're going to get this incredible result. It sounds kind of clickbaity, basically.
It's clickbaity. Listen, it was clickbaity. I was going to call you out on it, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I tend to just kind of push back on that kind of stuff, but I've had enough people tell me that this is actually a good book that I want to poke around in it at least and see what it's all about. I've had it for a while, just haven't really picked it up and read it yet. So how about you?
No, I am going another round with no Gap book. My challenge here, Mike, and I was going to bring this up to you. I actually sent you a picture of me reading the physical copy of The Catalyst, which, by the way, that lasted for about a chapter. And I then put down the physical copy and I picked back up the digital copy and I read the digital version of it. I don't like physical books. Anyhow, moving forward. I may...
Well, you'd be wrong, but that's okay.
Right.
Me and Ryan Holiday both disagree.
I love the idea of physical books. I like the feel of them. I just don't like to read them. Like they're not that interesting to me to read. But I will probably listen to a book, like while I'm like running or at the gym or something. I don't count that as a Gap book though. Like I mean that's information being forced into my ear canal. Like I don't really think of that as reading a book. So I don't count those as my Gap books, but I will probably do something like that between now and the next episode.
Yeah, you are spot on with that, by the way. A while back I did a 3-hour workshop that I called the Reading Masterclass.
I remember this.
And I get into the science behind how you read different with a physical medium as opposed to a screen, even something like an Amazon Kindle, coming from a conversation that I had with Marianne Wolf, who's like literally a scientist who studies this sort of stuff. So I'm guessing that most people listening to this and have listened to this point in the episode don't really care. So if that's you, that's normal. No problem. If you are one of the weird ones like me who wants to understand this stuff in greater detail, I do have a replay of that workshop available. I will put that in the show notes for people who are interested.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, so let's close this thing down. Let's pick up Tiny Experiments by Anne-Laure Lecoumphe. Did I say that right?
Anne-Laure Lecoumphe.
Anne-Laure Lecoumphe. Okay. So Anne-Laure Lecoumphe. We'll pick up Tiny Experiments. If you are interested in a little bit more of what we do, we record a pro show. So the pro show for this episode was about Mike's trip to the Painted
Porch. Yep. Ryan Holiday's bookstore.
So if you're interested in that, you can pick up the pro show. You can go to patreon.com/bookwormfm. You'll get access to the pro show. You'll get access to the bootleg version of the show, which is basically the moment we start the Zoom call, microphones start, and they run the whole way till the end, till we end the Zoom call. There's a bookworm wallpaper there. Just some perks. Really, it helps us kind of run the background of the show and run the hosting and things like that. So if you're interested in doing that, you can feel free to go to patreon.com/bookwormfm and sign up there for us. So
there's also a link in the show notes for if you want to support the show. It's $7 a month, and as Cory said, it really helps us keep the show going. So appreciate you doing that. The other thing with the bootleg is that it normally gets uploaded the moment that we get done. So usually it's about 2 weeks ahead of time. Mm-hmm. So if you want, the early access to the Bookworm episodes, that's what the bootleg gets you.
Wonderful. The last thing I'll mention is if you're interested in recommending a book for us to read, don't forget to check out the link in the show notes, and we'll take a look at those. And as we're thinking about the next books we're going to pick up. So pick up Tiny Experiments, and thanks for listening.